which I wrote. It took me many years to write it. But how it all began was my first card. I was learning with friends. My first card was in 2003. And we played together. We took a class together at the J. And after about 6 months, we had a regular game going. And I was beating everybody at least half the time. And I was like, I'm pretty good at this game. And I don't know if you're all familiar with the term, the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect means that the less you know about something, the better you think you are at it. So if you're a novice at something, but you think you know what you're doing, you're going to be much more confident about your abilities than somebody who's a veteran, who's been doing it for years, who knows what it's really all about. So here I am, 6 months in, thinking, I'm really good at this. I think I'm going to try a tournament. Oh, everybody froze. I think I'm going to try a tournament. So I don't know if you guys have done tournaments before, but this was what the tournament looked like, you know, big group of women, all in one room. I found that it was way too overwhelming for me. It was 8 rounds in one day. How many of you have done a tournament before? Anybody? Oh, okay, Susu has, and so is Betty. So you know, you're going from table to table for about 45 minutes, playing 4 hands, and then you move to another table ad infinitum. This particular tournament was 8 rounds in one day, which to a rookie is just brutal. So after, you know, 8 hours of mahjong, basically, including breaks, I had it. They were throwing the tiles at me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was giving away my Maj tiles all the time. I was just terrible. And I was so overwhelmed by the time it was over. On the way back, I had driven all the way out to Long Island and back, Long Island is 2 hours from me. So on the way back on the highway, I swear I saw green dragons on the highway. I was just so exhausted. It was just too much. But the one thing that I took away from it was, you know, I'm not as good as I thought I was, but there are some people who are amazing at this game, and I want to be like that. I want to get better at this game. And unfortunately, at the time, there weren't any books on it. This is 2003. I went to Barnes and Noble, I went to Borders, I went to Walden Books, all these bookstores. They have a game section, and they had books on bridge, tons of books on bridge, and they had books on poker, and they even had books on slot machines, like how to win at slot machines. I mean, they had everything but American Mahjong. And this is before Elaine Sandberg's book, which I don't know if any of you have read that, but that's a great book too. That had not come out yet. That didn't come out till 2010. So no books on American Mahjong. And I just thought to myself, there needs to be one. I'm going to figure out how to get better, and I'm going to write that book. But obviously, first I had to get better. So it took years, years of playing with better players and picking up their tips and just sort of sussing it out as I went along. And what I had originally hoped for was that I was going to find a mentor, a woman who knew everything about the game, but wasn't mean about it. You know, she's very laid back, like a grandmotherly type in her early 70s. She'd been around the block. She had a good attitude. You know, she had pictures of her grandchildren everywhere. She had her glasses on a chain around her neck. I pictured this woman, and in my mind, she was a Bubbe. And so I was basically searching for Bubbe Fischer. And I never actually met that particular woman, but over the years, as I said, I picked up a lot of skills. I picked up some great ideas, and I've become a tournament winner sometimes, but I will admit my biggest flaw in my personal game is poker face. I am terrible. Like, if you ever played against me, you would know. If I'm in a tournament and somebody throws the 4-bam and I wanted it and I can't call for it, I'll say, darn. I mean, I am totally transparent. I'm terrible. But I love thinking about Mahjong and strategizing and etiquette and everything that goes with Mahjong. I'm really a fan of. And in fact, I call myself a Mahjong philosopher. So I've written the Bubbe book, and then I traveled all around the country with it. I was speaking at JCCs in, West Coast, East Coast, South, North. I was in Texas. I was in Cleveland. I was in Milwaukee, wherever. But then they started telling me that they wanted to hear stories. So I also started writing novels, which wasn't my forte. I'm more of a nonfiction writer, but I've written 2 novels about Mahjong too. So written all these books. I still write. I have a blog that's free. So even if you just don't want to buy any books, I will give you the link to my blog so that you can always read up, because every year I write about how to learn the card quickly. I write my opinions about various things. I mean, I put out a plea in the very beginning of COVID saying, please don't play with your friends. Just wait until we see what's going on here before you start exposing yourself and your friends to germs. Anyway, so I write the blog every so often. I will give you that link at the end of the lecture. But anyway, that's my story, is I'm a writer who happens to love this game. And hopefully that comes across when I talk about the game. You'll see what it is that I love about it. And hopefully you share some of the same passions for it that I do. Okay, so as Nicole was saying, the main thing I'm going to talk about tonight are, well, it's night on the West Coast, on the East Coast, the 3 psychological benefits of Mahjong. These days it's more like 2.5, but there are 3 in theory. The first one is cognitive. I think we all know that this is a really hard game to learn. I am curious, just among this group here, how many of you are retired or even current teachers? How many of you are teachers or former teachers? That's all? Okay, well, that's a good percentage. What I found, even I traveled around, JCCs and other organizations, even more than being Jewish, one of the main predictors of being a Mahjong player was being a teacher, because they love rules, they love structure, but they also love creativity. And the thing about this game is you have to be creative. You're solving a puzzle every time you get your new tiles. I like to compare it to turning flax into gold. Like, you get this tile, this rack of tiles, it's total dreck, and you have to figure out, how are you going to make it better? What can you do with it? I mean, obviously the more jokers you have, you're excited, or if you see that you've already got 3 of the dragons, whatever it is, you're hoping to have the best hand you can, but you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with the garbage too, just to get through the hand. So cognitively, it's a puzzle, it's a challenge every single time you play. It's also figuring out probability, what are your chances of actually making it as the game goes along, switching up your hand. All of those things are really good for your brain, figuring out defense, what your opponents are playing. And then the number one cognitive challenge of this game, which you all know as veterans, or even if this is your second card, every year the card changes. And I don't know any other game that does that. The fact that we have to relearn every single year is amazing for our brains. That you have to forget the hands that you learned last year. Some of them are almost the same, but a good 75% of the hands change every year. Sometimes it's a return to an old hand that you've done before, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember how to do that. But it's still the skill of learning new, forgetting old. It's a wonderful challenge to your brain. And as I said, I don't know any other game that does that. Mahjong is the only one. An American Mahjong too, because there are other versions that don't use cards or use different kinds of cards. Okay, so cognitive, we all agree, great cognitive benefit of playing Mahjong. The second, which is really kind of half these days, although Nicole was telling me she's got a great idea, the half one is social. When we're not in the middle of a lockdown like this, we get together with our friends every week. We have an ongoing thing where you see your friends, you see what they're up to, you know that you can count on seeing them every week and how they're doing. A lot of people are doing the kind of thing Nicole's doing, where you still connect with your friends online. You can meet up with some of the different online Mahjong apps and then simultaneously Zoom with them while you're playing. I personally haven't done it, but I've heard other people do it, and it seems to work okay. In fact, based on that, there's also going to be a Mahjong tournament coming up, the first online tournament that I've heard of for American Mahjong. It should be very interesting. I'm going to write a blog article about that soon. The idea that the best part of the game for some people, I mean, I love the cognitive, the mental challenge, but the social is very important too, having that group of support. I mean, I've heard of stories of people that have been through everything together, loss of parents, marriages, divorces, everything. I've even had friends that have said, well, if she retires to that community, I'm going to retire to that community too, so we can keep playing together. I mean, it's a really strong, wonderful bond that happens. So that is a social benefit. There's another social benefit if you're new in town. If you know the Mahjong card, you can play it against somebody anywhere. I've played in Florida, I've played in Vancouver, I've played in Hawaii. we all use the same Mahjong card. And it's wonderful for that. The only thing about Florida, I don't know what you all do in Arizona. I'd like to think you don't do the crazy thing that they do in Florida where they throw and then pick. Do you all know what I'm talking about? The 14 tile game? Yeah, that's a Florida thing. And in fact, if you call the league with a question and they say, are you from Florida? And you say yes, they say, I can't answer your question because you're already not using the league rules. If you're throwing and then picking, that's against the rules to begin with. They have this thing called futures that, again, not part of the current version of the rules. It's an old thing that phased out in the 60s, but people in Florida play it. Anyway, so socially, it's a great way to meet new people and connect and have like an immediate group of people that you can relate to. I always tell people try the senior center or try the library or obviously try the JCC when you're new in town, or even if you're only like a snowbird and you need to meet people. That's a great way to find new people to play with. I'm sure if you're living in a community where there's a clubhouse, that's also a great way to connect. How many of you are familiar with the fact that there's another version of American Mahjong? When Roberta knows about this, when we first had Mahjong in this country in 1920, Joseph Babcock brought it over and it was popular with all different social strata. Rich people loved it, poor people loved it. It was very stylish. But in the 30s, the only two groups that really continued to play were Jewish women and military wives. And they sort of veered in two different directions. The Jewish ladies started up the National Mahjong League in New York, and that's the card that we still play with. That's the organization. The military group, based out of the Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio, called Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So the rules are called the Wright-Patterson rules, and it's the Wright-Patterson version of Mahjong. They have a card, it's different than ours. It's very different from ours. It only comes out every 4 or 5 years. And part of that is because one of the main advantages is they want you to be able to play it anywhere in the world, because you could be at a base in the Philippines, you could be at a base in Germany, you could be at a base in Australia, wherever you are. With your Wright-Patterson rules, you can play against other people with Wright-Patterson rules. So that's truly a great social thing. They even call it from pillar to post, the idea that you can play it anywhere in the world. The differences between Wright-Patterson and the version that we all play, they have a thing called a chow, which is, it's like a run. We call it a run, where it's like 6, 7, 8 or 2, 3, 4. That is a 3 of a kind that they use automatically, that we don't usually incorporate into our cards except very rarely. So they have chows, they don't have jokers, and they have the flowers having more significance than ours do. Like you try to get 4 different numbered flowers, for instance. The way that, when you get your flowers, sometimes you use seasons, or for them, the flowers actually have significance. We just say a flower is a flower. It doesn't really matter which one it is. So just so you know, that's what I mean when I say social benefit of Mahjong. Having a social group, whether it be the Wright-Patterson people or the Mahjong League people, it's a wonderful way to meet people and make friends. It's funny, Nicole was telling me that the group that used to meet at the J once a month was very laid back. It was fun. It was social. It wasn't that competitive. I talk about that. Obviously, sometimes we do need that social. We need that group of friends that we need to tell things to. And I say, what you should know this. I hope you know this. What's said at the Mahjong table stays at the Mahjong table, because it's the opportunity for you to say things that you might not otherwise say. But there are 2 versions of playing, 2 styles of play. There's a wine game and a coffee game. And what Nicole was talking about sounds to me like a wine game, where it's like, we're just here for a good time. And if we get through 2 hands in an hour, that's a miracle. And, oh, it looks like you need a flower here, I'll throw you one. And I don't personally drink coffee, but I definitely play coffee, if you know what I mean. It's like, we're doing this, we're going to get through 5 or 6 hands in an hour. We're here to play. Certainly if somebody needs to talk, we take a little break and they vent, or if they're the one that's up and walking around and having a little nosh, they can say what they want to say. But most people are focused on the game in my group's coffee game. But I know of some very happy wine groups, and that's fine. It's just compatibility. You need to find a group that's got the same agenda you do. If you're a wine person and everybody else is a coffee person, it's not going to work too well. You've got to have a compromise. Okay, so that's the social, the cognitive, and then the third one, that you rarely hear about is the emotional. Mahjong is a wonderful emotional outlet for you. If you are frustrated about things that are going on in your life, if you're worried, if you're nervous, if you're distracted, once you get those tiles in front of you, you've got to focus for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, however long it takes. All you care about is the tiles in front of you. It's a wonderful opportunity to focus and distract yourself. And the frustrations that you have about other things you can take out on the tiles, like, oh, if I just got that third flower or whatever it is, you're focused. So it's very healthy for you to sort of distract yourself from the other stuff momentarily. If you win, you get that tremendous boost of endorphin. You get the sense of, I achieved something and my friends, saw that I could do this. I've done a good job. I'm proud of myself. And if you lose, you let go of the frustration and you move on to the next hand. Very healthy. That's the thing about the game, is there's always going to be another hand. And what I like to say is that generally over time, the sun's starting to set here, so it's coming in the window. Generally over time, with a well-matched group, you should be winning about 20% of the hands over time. There will be days when you're like super hot and you're getting all the jokers and you're doing great. And there'll be times you couldn't get a joker to save your life, or you're always one tile away. I call that being a bridesmaid, where you're one tile away and you never win. There are days like that when you're just frustrated. But over time, everybody should turn out about even if you have the same skill level. And when I say 20%, that's because there's going to be wall games. So one of the Bubbeisms, one of my famous phrases is, if you can't win, don't lose. So that means if you're 3 picks away, like the wall is almost gone, don't throw a winning tile. Break up your hand at that point. If there's no way you're going to win, don't throw a flower. Don't throw something that obviously someone else needs. Go for the wall game. Especially if you're doing a tournament, it means getting points. But even if you're not in a tournament, maybe I'm talking to a bunch of wine players. If you're all wine players, go ahead, throw the tile. But if you're a serious player and you want to win and you can't win, at least don't lose. So that's about the 20%. So what I find when I talk to groups is some people say, I don't win 20%. I find myself losing all the time. I say, get my book, because I talk about some of the reasons you might not be winning as much. You might not be calling aggressively enough. You might not be having a good backup hand. You might not know when to switch hands. You might not know how to play defensively. All of those things can be fixed, and you should improve your game by looking at, by thinking about things in advance and learning the card and all of that. So 20% is reasonable. If you're winning 50 or 60% of the time, if you're schmountzing your friends every week, if your purse is heavy every week when you leave, that's nice, but you need more of a challenge. And that's part of what tournaments are good for, is having the opportunity to play against new players who won't pass you the same things, who might challenge you, who you can't figure out as easily. Or just finding another group. Don't lose your old group because they're your friends. But I always say, challenge yourself to play maybe at a little higher level. So that's the 20% thing. The other thing I want to talk about is the number 70. Because I have developed an idea that this game is about 70% luck. You can't control 3 out of 4 tiles. You can't control what other people pick up. You don't even know if you'll ever see those tiles. You only see 1 out of every 4 tiles. You can only call for a certain number of tiles. You don't always have the opportunity to. So 70% of this game is out of your control, but 30% of it is. And my job in this book is to maximize your 30%, to get you as strong as you can be so that you can control things for that other 70% when the luck happens. And the most famous Bubbeism is, luck favors the prepared mind. What that means is, if you're prepared, if you've done your homework, if you know what you're doing, when the lucky opportunities come, you will know what to do with them. So for instance, if you think, I've got a backup hand, I've got a second thing, and I can switch to it if I need to, you'll be ready. If you get another joker, you'll know what to do with it. The main underlying thing for being prepared is to know the card. Those of you who are veterans know exactly what I'm talking about. As soon as you get the new card, you want to figure out strategies of how to learn it quickly how to figure out what hands work well together or a natural switch hand, what hands, are the best ones to go to when you really don't have anything that makes sense in your hand. Just the better you know the card, the less time you're spending looking at the card, looking at your tiles, looking at the card, looking at what's been thrown, looking at the other people's racks. You can just focus instead of staring at the card. You can focus at everything else that's going on. So that is the number one thing that I teach people, is how to learn the card quickly and how to think about the card in creative ways. I mean, I've met people who are so afraid of getting out of their comfort zone that they never learn the whole card. In fact, they're like, oh, I never play singles and pairs, or, oh, I never use quints. I've had students who said, I only want to play the one suit hands. And in fact, I had a student who only liked dots. She couldn't understand the cracks, so she never played cracks, and she couldn't understand the wins, so she never played wins. She would just pass everything around until she had dots, and then she would play dots every time. And that's, needless to say, you are cutting yourself off at the knees. You're not having any opportunity to win. Well, maybe you'll win once in a while, but the better you know the card, the more options are available to you, the more you can strategize, the more you can plan, the more you can think about it. So there are various tricks that I teach of how to learn the card quickly. Some are visual. It depends on your learning style. I happen to be mathematical, so I look for patterns. Some people like to visualize every single hand in front of them. So they take their tiles and they literally make every single hand and look at what it would look like on a rack, just to familiarize themselves with every hand. I teach something in my book called Charleston Solitaire, where I say set up 13, 13, 13, and 14, and literally go through an entire solitaire for all four players. I mean, an entire Charleston for all four players. No vested interest in the success of any one of them, but you're actually maximizing the potential of each of the four hands. And that's a quick way to learn the card too, because you're starting to think about, well, what goes with what on this hand and what would work best for this one. I'm telling you, the better you know this card and the more you think about what you could do as new tiles come in, the better of a player you're going to be. I have heard from veteran players, they've been playing 20, 25 years. I bring up things they never thought of. Rookies, needless to say, get a lot out of it too. I don't know if you all, think about a Fisher Price toy, where on the side of the Fisher Price toy, it'll say things like, this is for ages 7 and up, or this is for ages 2 to 5. I like to say that the book is really best for 6 months to 4 years of experience, but anybody can get something out of the game, out of the book, to improve their game. So that being said, we all understand these 3 benefits: cognitive, social, and emotional. And I've given you my little spiel about being as prepared as you can be. And I'm ready to open it up for any questions you might have. I can talk about tournaments, I can talk about strategy, I can talk about etiquette, I can talk about history, just any Maj-related issues that come up. So.
Great. So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat and I can ask Karen, or raise your hand, or if you're not on, your video's not on, you can just in the chat, just so we don't all talk at once. But trying to see hands if anyone has. Oh, Gail, go ahead.
Why in the world is every set different that you can't for the life of you figure out? And I'm newbie, so I'm like, okay, that's clearly a flower. No, that was a one bam.
Yeah, the one bam is.
Did men create these tiles? And that's why, like, why is a flower not say flower on it? Why did, like, anyway, that's my question.
It's a good question. Well, Gail, do you know the history that the card has evolved over time, that it didn't used to have jokers?
No, I know like next to nothing.
Okay, well, there used to be 16 jokers at least in a set. And there were, 16 flowers, and there were no jokers. And what people started doing, what my grandma did, and probably some of your mothers and grandmas did, was once the league said, no, now there are jokers, they took nail polish and they painted over some of their flowers. So you will find these sets like my grandmother's, where the jokers are flowers that have been painted over with red nail polish. So there's an example where, is it a flower? Is it a joker? Well, it's got the nail polish, so it's probably a joker. Some flowers don't look like flowers. They look like two little men carrying a rickshaw, or they look like spring or summer. What you need to do, and what's only fair, whenever you play against someone, especially when it's a new person, ask if they will show you their dragons, their one bams, and an example of a flower. So especially the one bam. Once you know what the one bam looks like, you won't confuse it with the flowers, but it just helps to see what kind of flowers they've got. But definitely also their dragons can get confusing. Some of them have a P and just that, like the soap tile is just a blank tile with a P on it. Some of them actually have a dragon, or like, anyway, they all look different. So when you play against a new person, say, can you please show me your jokers, your dragons, your one bams, and an example of a flower. And that'll help you a lot.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's a great question, because I get very frustrated about that too.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Someone else had a question. Someone else was raising. Oh, Roberta, can you just go ahead and unmute yourself first?
Okay, I don't have a question, but you mentioned that you can't win, don't lose. And we say it a little differently. We say you can't win second.
That's true too. That is absolutely true.
So
and everybody,
people say, what do you mean by that? You know,
you
it's
can't
don't throw
mahjong
the
second.
card because only one person can mahjong.
You are right.
So that's our phrase.
I like it.
Thank you.
Something I didn't bring up in the lecture, but it's all over my blog, is betting. I don't know how many of you play for money, and how many of you, do you all play for money, or is that not a thing here? Okay, so do you have a pie? Do you know what pie is? Pie is the loss limit. So like you'll come in, you'll say, okay, we're playing for $4 today, or we're playing for $10 today. There are ladies in Dallas who play for $100 pie, which is, I say, if you're playing for that much, why don't you just go to the casino? But there are all sorts of players out there. But not only are some people playing with betting, I mean with money, but some play with a bettor. Do you all play with a bettor? No, nobody knows what a bettor is? Oh, Rita knows. Okay, a bettor is a person who goes and looks around the table. She's a fifth player, and she looks and she sees which hand she thinks will win. And so whatever happens to that player, she ties her fortune with that player for that hand. So like if the person wins, everybody has to pay her as well as the winner. If the person loses, she has to pay whatever the losing person pays. What I found when I played with my group that really ticked me off was there were a few people that would go around and say, they'd look at the tiles after the Charleston to decide who they were betting on. They'd say, what hand are you going to play? And what I said, it doesn't matter what I think I'm going to play. I might change it. Why do you care what I think I'm going to play? So what I've done when I go to tournaments, I keep statistics because I'm a math nerd. So I keep statistics on how many jokers I start with, how many flowers I start with, what hand at the end of the Charleston I think I'm going for. And I have a little writing system, like CR5 means the consecutive on the fifth hand, and Q2 means the second hand in quints. So I like write that down, and I have the lines on the paper, and I'll say every hand, it's like, okay, I started with one flower, two jokers. I thought I was going for CR5. I ended up with 3 jokers, 2 flowers, and a totally different hand. And I'll write what the second hand was and who won the hand and what hand actually won. And what I found was literally 50% of the time, we played 48 hands over a tournament. 50% of the time, the hand that I had at the end of the game was not the hand I had at the end of the Charleston. So my point, I was right, that why are you asking what I'm going for when it could change? It literally changed half the time. So I don't know if you've had that experience already too, that you don't necessarily play the hand that you think you're playing at the end of the Charleston. But I'll just throw that in there as an observation I've made over time, that you don't necessarily know exactly how the hand is going to end up just because you've gone through a Charleston with it. Susu had a question. Turn on your microphone.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, we play with 3. Do you have any suggestions for a 3 game? We do the Charleston.
Okay, there are a couple different versions. The official league rule version of a 3-man game, the official one is to just deal out 13, 13, and 14, no Charleston. and you start cold, which drives me nuts because I need a Charleston to prepare my mind. You know, I start to think about, well, let me fix it this way. The official way to play, according to the league, is no Charleston. You just play. I put a version in my book that I call Wally, where we have a fourth player. And what we do, I'm mostly a very kosher by the book player, but when it comes to a 3-man game, my Wally game is a little bit crazy because what I say is if Wally gives you a joker, you can take it. And in a legit game, you could not do that. But just for fun, we do it that way. And the idea is you are passing tiles to Wally that you don't necessarily want anybody else to have. Like I'm a sucker for a soap. I don't know if anybody else out there is, but if I get a soap, I'm going for one of those year hands. I always do. So if I have a soap that I don't need, I'm going to hide it in Wally so that nobody else gets it. I don't want to pass it to somebody and have them automatically get it in the Charleston. So that's the version we play where we treat it like a Charleston where Wally's giving us tiles and we're giving Wally tiles and we just sort of hide things in Wally. But it's written up in the book, and I could probably write another blog article about how to play 3-man again because it's certainly something interesting. I don't play Siamese, but some of you might be familiar with Siamese. Yeah, it's hot right now, especially when there's barely anybody to play with. Fewer germs if you play Siamese. But I haven't really gotten good at it, so I don't know a lot about it. But certainly there are rules for that too. So obviously the best way to play is with 4 friends for hours on end, but right now that's not necessarily the easiest option.
So someone had a question in the chat. They said, can you talk about tapping their tiles? It drives me crazy.
Is that the whole idea? Is that an impatient thing, or is that I'm tapping it so that you can't call for the thing that was just the one that was most recently discarded?
Let me unmute myself and yes, I know.
Okay, Janet, come clean. What did you want?
Learning to play. Yeah, so I taught after I learned, and I was a teacher for 25 years, and when I retired, so I taught the other retired teachers how to play. And
Great.
So then they went off on their own, and one gal goes off to one of her groups, and when she, let me see how it goes, when she picks a tile, she taps it. She taps her on the rack.
Right.
Taps
Right.
on the rack, so you can't
Call for the discard.
can't call for it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, because
Okay.
because the idea is you anybody can call for a discarded tile until the next person racks their pick. But tapping is not racking.
Right.
But it is kind of an obnoxious, I mean, it almost becomes sort of a ritual without really thinking about it. I told you about my terrible defense that I will, say darn. I also will just sit there and hold a tile and not rack it. And then, like, if it's a joker, which has happened, I'll have it in my hand and somebody will call for a tile that was discarded. I can't have that joker because I didn't rack it. Somebody can have the discard and I'm stuck. So there's a certain wisdom to racking immediately so that nobody can call for the previous and you get the tile that's in your hand. But tapping is different than racking, and it's an etiquette thing. You've got to clarify when the game starts. Look, we're not going to consider tapping the same as racking. Just clarify with her. We understand you don't want anybody calling for the tiles, but it gets really annoying. I know. And it's a tournament thing too. It comes up a lot in tournaments because you're playing against people you don't ordinarily play with, so that kind of thing does come up. But that's why she's doing it, is so you can't call for discards.
So someone had another question. They said that they have a wonderful set. Oh, it went away. Hold on. They have a wonderful set from China, which only has 2 blanks. Would you know where she can have jokers made for it? They're bigger than her tiles.
Wait. How many tiles does it have? Does it have extra flowers? If she got it in China, it might have extra flowers. If it does, who are we talking to? Whose question is it?
Pinky.
Pinky. Okay, Pinky, I can't see you, but just so you know, if it has enough flowers that you're not using, if it's got more than 8 flowers, you can buy some really cute Joker stickers and put them on the extra flowers. And that way you have more Jokers. In fact, there's some really beautiful Joker stickers out there. And you'd be much better off using tiles that came with the original set than trying to incorporate extra tiles that don't really match, because then everybody knows when those tiles come up that those are the Jokers. I do know some amazing collectors and some people that try to match things to match your set. So if it really came down to it and you really found yourself stuck, I'm going to give you guys my email anyway, but I would say email me and I will give you the name of those collectors, and they could probably help you out. You know, you take measurements, you'd show them the exact color of your tiles, and they could see if they could find something that matches your set well. But your best bet, because it's going to stand out like a sore thumb unless it's a perfect match, your best bet is that if you have extra flowers, find stickers and just put stickers on some to make them Jokers. The other thing, if you have a Chinese set, is it probably doesn't have the numbers on the cracks. See, I'm getting no feedback from Pinky, so I don't know. But I'm just going to tell all of you that the difference between an American set and a Chinese set is we have the north, south, east, and west, you know, little letters in the corner, and we have numbers written on the cracks so we know exactly what it is. I mean, you could figure out dots because there's dots. You can figure out bands because you count them. But it is hard to figure out the cracks. If you've been playing long enough and you know what each of the cracks is without seeing the number, you've been playing too long. But a Chinese set is harder to learn on anyway because of those things, but not having the Jokers, it should have extra flowers. That should be your solution, is to put stickers on extra flowers.
You
That's
had
my answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. You had mentioned that I guess in Florida they play with 14 tiles, and so someone said they're in Florida and they are having problems
Is that Sharon?
finding a 13 tile game. She was just curious what the reasoning was for the 14 tile game.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. That was how they were playing originally. That was the style in the 60s. No, it wasn't. Put on your sound so I can hear. Your what do you call it? Your microphone is off. Unmute. Top right corner.
We never played with 14 tiles.
Okay, good.
I played way back in the 60s.
And they didn't?
Why isn't it working?
No, it is. Sharon, it's working now.
You can hear.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. They tell me here in Florida that the reasoning for the 14 tiles is they felt that people who had a Joker, not a Joker, what do you call it? I forget what you call it, a future, were cheaters. They would cheat and they would mistakenly put the tile in their hands. I don't know how you do that when everybody's hands are visible, but that was what they told me.
Well, that's the other part of it, is they also play with futures. We don't play with futures. The new standardized rules since the 70s are you have 13 tiles on your rack. You pick up a 14th tile, you choose which among the 14 to discard. With futures, you have a 14th tile sitting on your rack that you may incorporate,
right,
or you may discard. But I don't even know. I don't even play with it. But yes, there's a lot of cheating that goes on with futures. It gets very confusing. A lot of people that have played 14 tell me it's a faster game because
Yes.
you're more decisive.
Yes.
It's a different strategy because you've already decided that you're getting rid of something. But that goes against everything that I was just talking about, where
Right.
when you change your hand because you picked something new, I don't play that way.
I know it's difficult.
Feel free. I would say, Sharon, when you go to the clubhouse, find out who's from not Long Island.
I'm trying.
Oh, it's hard. Even put up a notice. Even put up a notice and say who's looking for a 13 tile game.
They might egg my house after that.
It is hard. It is hard.
You had mentioned about racking your tile. So someone said when they learned how to play, the instructor insisted that she rack the tile first, but so many players today do not do that and are offended when you suggest it. So she said, please advise.
I think her teacher's correct, but you can't tell somebody else what to do. It's like, it's not like a seatbelt. Obviously, we have to wear our seatbelts. It would be wise to rack, but not everybody follows that rule. And the reason that it would be wise is so that they can't take your joker away from you. It has happened to me, I'd say it happens 3 or 4 times a year. And every time it does, I say, why did I let that happen? But the smartest thing to do would be to rack immediately. But we don't all do that,
That's a good tip.
But just don't, you can't tell somebody else what to do because she's going to think you're a nudge. So you just have to, at least you know the right way to play. So you play that way and let everybody else get the jokers taken away because they forgot to rack.
Okay, so I have a question.
Sure.
If you rack your tile and somebody, if you rack it, then the person before you or ahead of you cannot call the tile that was played before then.
Correct.
So if you just get that tile, pull that tile and lay it down and not look at it,
Correct.
then the other person can.
No, what you mean? Just flip it over? Not even look at it. Just
You don't
discard
look
it?
at it, yeah.
And
But
you just discard it? Why would you do that?
Well, no, you wouldn't discard it. I'm saying, say somebody, okay, you get a tile,
Mhm.
it's your turn. Then if you haven't looked at it, can somebody before you or somebody else call the tile that was played before, or is it already,
Yes.
if you've already
No.
put that tile?
Until you put that tile, until you either put that tile on your rack or discard it. Like sometimes I will look at a card and immediately know I don't want it and throw it out. Like I'll immediately flip it over and name it, and it's been discarded once I name it. Until you either name the discard or put it on your rack, they can call for the previous discard.
Okay, because some of the people I played with said, no, you've already gotten that tile.
What,
And
as
I
soon as you
said,
touch it? They said as soon as you touch it?
as soon as you touch that tile,
No, it's not
okay.
it's not touch, it's either rack or name.
If you don't rack it, they should be able to, you should be able to
call for the previous.
call it.
Yes.
Got it.
So if you pick a tile and you can just place it on your rack, but you haven't put it in your hand, it's still okay just by putting it on your rack.
Exactly. You haven't thought about it yet. You don't even know what tile it is, but it's on your rack so nobody else can touch the old one. So that's probably the smartest way to do it, because that way nobody else can call for it. You don't even know if you want it, but at least you've stopped. It's called covering. You have covered the previous discard.
But that
It's
means
now
you're
unavailable.
ahead.
Okay, so if
That
you
means
were,
what?
Doesn't that mean you're picking ahead?
No, you're waiting until the previous tile was discarded. You don't pick the next tile until she's called and named her previous discard.
Oh, okay,
Person to
right.
your left throws out her tile. She says, 6 bam. Then it's your
I'm
turn. You pick up the
wondering,
tile. Amanda's trying to talk, I think.
yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm wondering if the previous question was actually talking about when you touch a tile, then you personally cannot still call the previous tile because
Oh,
you've
yeah.
touched it.
Absolutely. If you touch the wall, if you start to pick or even touch the wall to pick your next tile, and then you go, oh wait, no, I want that discard. That's not
Exactly.
cool. No, once you have touched the rack, once you've touched the wall, you can't have it both ways. You can't touch the tile and then also go for the discard.
So Cheryl had a question. Cheryl, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, because
Well,
it's not
look
going to
at
make
you.
anyone a better player, but I'm just curious. So in Crazy Rich Asians, they're playing Maj, and the mom exposes her hand, and then the soon-to-be daughter-in-law exposes her hand, and the mom kind of like gasps as if it's a good hand. I'm a newbie. I have no idea what hand she's exposing and what it is. And Roberta's
Yes.
saying there's not a second place person. So what happened in that scene?
Okay, what happened in that scene, it's a different version of Mahjong than we play, but the idea was she was going to win, and she had picked up the tile that made her hand win, but she decided that it was like the same as she was sacrificing her relationship with the son to make the mother happy. She was going to sacrifice that tile to make the mother happy. So she threw out the 8-bam, even though it completed her hand, and it made the mother win. So the mother won, but then the girl shows, look, I needed that 8-bam. I would have won, but I threw away my winning tile to you so that you could win. So it was an
Now,
act of sacrifice.
now it all
Don't
makes
do that.
sense. Thank you.
Ah, you're welcome. That was a good movie.
Somebody asked, and this is, I think, probably good for everybody. Do you have any tips for this year's card?
Ah ha ha. Okay, first of all, go to my blog. There's a whole bunch of articles about the new one, and there's even a link to a podcast that I did with a friend of mine where I get way too enthusiastic about this stuff. I started waxing rhapsodic about some of these hands. So yes, I have all sorts of tips in the blog, which is free. It's free. What I will tell you about this card, some of the really quick off the top, if you don't mind. I'm sorry to slow you all down, but I'm going to share the screen with some tips that I have. No, not that. That's not it. Shoot. Okay. Sorry, I don't know if you're seeing all this horrible stuff. I apologize in advance.
We're not seeing anything yet.
Okay, I don't know if I hit share screen. That's probably why. Okay, let me go back to share screen. Sorry, but I have it all written down here just for talking points. Share screen, try it again. There we go. Share.
There we
Okay,
go.
this was not Bubbe Fischer. This was my joke of who Bubbe would have been. Here are the links to my blog and my email address. You can also always just type into Google Bubbe Mahjong blog, and the URL will come up for the blog, and there's probably about 60 or 70 articles there. So it's a good thing to have, is just you can easily link to getting any article you want. There's a bunch up there. And I also have my email address, and I like to tell people I'm more responsive and quicker than the league, because they have an answering machine, and God knows how often they're answering. But you can always email me and I'll get back to you. That's my Bubbe email. So going through some of the little visuals I had. Okay. This is when I talk about the visual, that every year, there's certain patterns that show up. Sometimes it's a step, sometimes it's a bell curve. There's different 3-4 patterns where there's it's 3 of a kind, 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, 4 of a kind, or 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind. Anyway, this year, this is a real quick summary where I talk about what's unique about this year's card. So the fact that there are 5 flowers this year is kind of different. There are no 3 flowers for an exposure, but there are 5 flower hands. There are 3 of them. The multiplication hands are kind of interesting. They use all 3 suits. Another interesting thing in this year's card is the fact that there are 2 soaps required. There were actually hands last year, you probably noticed, there were some hands where you didn't even have to have soaps to make a year hand. But this year you must have 2, because 2020, you need 2 soaps. So that's different. Another interesting thing is the fact that that biggest hand is worth 85 cents. It used to be 75. I talk about illegal exposures. I have a whole blog article about that. You can't expose 3 flowers, 3 dragons, 3 norths, or 3 souths. Playing defensively, if you ever see someone exposing any of those pungs, dragons, norths, souths, or flowers, their hand is dead. And we can get into this whole philosophical issue of whether it's better to call somebody's hand dead or not. And I write articles about it, and I'm happy to talk about it here too. There are reasons why you might want to call someone's hand dead, or there's reasons why you might not want to. Anyway, the other illegal exposures are 5 dragons or 5 winds. So there's a whole, I have a link to one of the articles there. That's the Bubbe Speaks article, happens to be the one that's about my podcast with my friend. But there's all sorts of articles in there about the 2020 card. And there's even some articles about previous years, because it's been up there for a while. So if you feel like going back to an old card and just thinking about strategically the kinds of things that I had to say about previous year's cards. It's worth reading.
Someone asked, what's a reason not to call someone's hand dead?
Reason not to call someone's hand dead is, there's a couple. One is kind of a craven one. It's like a scavenger. If someone puts out 3 flowers, for instance, and you know 3 flowers is illegal this year, but it's 2 flowers and a joker and you really want that joker, some people would say, I'm going to wait. I'm going to take her joker and then I'll call her dead. And that's, so that's one reason not to call someone dead. Another reason not to call someone dead is you're not winning and you're not going to win. Your hand is terrible, but you don't want anyone else to win. If you call her hand, well, she's not going to win because her hand's dead. There's no way that she can win. But she, if you keep her in the game, if you don't call her hand dead, she's still making 1/4 of the picks. If you call her hand dead and she says, yes, I'm dead, your other 2 opponents each get that many more chances to win. So defensively, you might say, you know what? I'd rather keep everybody in the game and not, you know, not eliminate one player so that they have fewer chances of getting a winning tile. Again, this is, a coffee strategy. Wine strategy, I know there are plenty of people who are like, I would never call my friends dead. That's mean. They say, that's so mean to call someone's hand dead. But the reason that you do it, it's not that they're going to win if you don't call them dead. If their hand is literally dead, there's no way they can win. Their hand doesn't match anything on the card. So they're not going to win. They shouldn't feel offended. People get very sensitive. They shouldn't feel offended that their hand has been called dead because, you know, you're going to play another hand in 3 minutes. But if they can't win and it's clear to everybody that they've gotten illegal exposure, they shouldn't be personally offended if you point that out. So that's a sensitive thing. I mean, probably some of you have played with a very sensitive player who hates being called dead. Has that happened? Or you agree among your group never to call people dead? Does that happen?
Call her dead.
Okay, good. And usually everybody sees it right away. But if they don't, sometimes if you're waiting on it, it might be because you were thinking, I want to keep everybody in the game for a while. Or if you're winning and you think, I want more chances, you would call the person's hand dead as quickly as you can so that you have that many more chances. Like if she put out something that's clearly illegal. I don't have the card memorized yet, so I can't give you an example off the top of my head, but she puts out something that's clearly wrong and you point that out and she's now dead. Her hand is now dead. It gives you that many more chances to win. So it's a strategic thing, but you can see why defensively, if you're not going to win, you want to keep as many players in as possible to lower the chances of anyone else winning. Make sense?
I think, Susu, do you want to unmute yourself?
Does your book have any value for a seasoned player? I've been playing for 45 years. My mother taught me, and I taught both my daughters.
Well, the first half of it is a memoir, and the second half of it is a manual. And like I said, there are players that have said, you pointed out things I'd never seen before, or you thought about it in a way I hadn't thought of it. I can't say it's going to improve your game a lot because your game's probably already really good, but it may give you some new perspectives. I would say start with the blogs. See if the blogs make any sense to you, have any value for you, and if you're getting anything out of those, you might enjoy the book too. Some people tell me it's just like hanging out with me because I write pretty much as I speak. So you will hear my voice in the book. I still go back to it every so often. I'm like, I wrote that, I forgot. So there's some useful tips in there, and I will promise you rookie players, anybody who's 3 or 4 years or less, I do promise your game is going to get better. And if you're the only one in your group that reads the book, your game is going to get much better than theirs. They're going to be like, what the heck happened? How did this happen? If all 4 of you read the book, you're going to sort of cancel each other out. But I do think it really does help you focus and think about things. The whole point is you're now going to be more, like I said, philosophical about it. You're going to anticipate and be more ready for opportunities. So it's really good for focusing your head into the game a little bit better. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, Are there any other questions? I don't see any other hands. Well, thank you so much, Karen. I mean, like I said, I just learned a few months ago, so this is all very interesting to me. And at the same time, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more than I even thought. But it's so interesting, and I love that there's, you know, tradition with it and history with it, and I think that's just such a great thing. But truly, thank you for, you know, taking the time out to speak with us today. And I will also send out Karen's blog and email
Perfect.
tomorrow
Perfect.
in case you weren't able to get it down. And also where to get your book if anyone's interested. I know I am. I need to get better. So thank you, everyone. Also, I hope you enjoyed it. And be safe, be well, and thank you so much. Have a good
Nice
night.
to meet you all. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.